Story 1. You should have better worded your threat because I saw it as an opportunity. Here's what happened. Some years ago, when I was 25, I broke up with my 24-year-old girlfriend. She had cheated on me after 7 years together, and where we lived, we had a 1-month notice to leave our apartment. In order to avoid paying 2 rents, I had to wait until the end of the notice before moving out. In the end, she kept at the apartment with a new roommate, but we still had to pass the landlord's inspection to get our security deposit back. I moved out something like 5 days before the inspection date, and living with someone you dumped for almost a month can be hard. She was either trying to convince me to stay with her or trying to make my life miserable because I dumped her. As you can guess, when I moved out, I wasn't thrilled to know that I'd have to come back some days later to refill holes, repair some stuff, and clean the apartment with her before the inspection. But hey, I'll do it. So, just before leaving, sitting in my car about to start the engine, she tells me, "You'd better really help me for the cleanup. You either clean really good or I keep the security deposit." Maybe a bit of context was lost in translation because this discussion wasn't in English. The way she worded it could mean either a threat or a choice. The tone and context sure enough clarified that it wasn't supposed to be a choice. Some things to know. I sure don't love doing chores, but cleaning isn't an issue for me. For her, most of it isn't either, but in the 7 years we were together, she never cleaned the toilets or the bathtub drain because it disgusted her. So I did it, and she did other stuff to compensate. Money-wise, I was a working IT engineer, and she was a student. So the security deposit, $300 to $400 euros each, may be huge for her, but I didn't care that much. So I simply replied, "Okay." She looked at me a bit confused, not understanding my answer. I said, "Okay, keep the deposit and do it all by yourself." I didn't wait for an answer, drove off, and when I arrived, I messaged the landlord with a copy for my ex, telling them to send the full deposit to my ex and none to me, and I never set foot in this apartment again. Edit. I didn't think this post would have so much attention. Some info, since people asked and not everyone will check the comments. She kept the apartment, but since my name was on the contract, the landlord had to refund the security deposit and have a new one in order to make a new contract. Legal reasons, I guess. Bathtub siphon equals bathtub drain. English is not my first language. Google Translate. Story 2. I'm required to work 40 hours a week, okay? Years ago, I worked for a company that tried to skate by with as little labor overhead as possible. They'd hire underqualified people and then expect top results. Management was a husband and wife who ran the company like it was a Fortune 500 company. We maybe had 30 to 40 employees. They'd implement all sorts of policies. Most of them were arbitrary and very micromanaging. One of the policies they created was a mandatory 40 hours policy. If you missed any work Monday through Friday, you'd have to come in on Saturday to make it up. No excuses accepted. If you didn't come in on Saturday to make up the time, you'd get a strike. 3 strikes, and you're gone. One day I needed to take off from work a half an hour early, and I cleared it with my on-site boss. On Friday, one of the owners called me to say she was double-checking to make sure I'll be there on Saturday. I explained it was only a half an hour I missed, and she said there were no excuses accepted. I needed to work my 40 hours, otherwise I'd get a strike. Cue my malicious compliance. I told her okay, and I'd be there on Saturday. I get to the site on time for the 7 a.m. roll call. The on-site boss takes the roll and starts telling people what projects they're going to work on. There are about 15 people on site, and I deliberately stand in the back waiting. By the time the boss makes it to me, it's about 7:25 a.m. He starts detailing my job, and I cut him off and explain that I'll be leaving in 5 minutes. He looks at me and asks why. I explained to him that I was told I needed to work my 40 hours and that since I missed a half an hour of work, I only needed to make up a half an hour and would be leaving at 7:30. He asks why I can't stay all day and get the overtime. I replied that I'm only required to work 40 hours and that I have plans. I left promptly at 7:30 a.m. and had a great weekend. Come Monday, I got a "We're disappointed that you chose not to stay to help your coworkers" speech from the bosses, and that was about it. That policy went away a few weeks later. Story 3. People don't understand why you're leaving early. I was working for a smallish company with about 60 employees across several locations. IT support for both hardware, laptops, phones, and software. When I was hired just under 9 years ago, it was verbally agreed that instead of clocking any call-outs as overtime, I would just take the time in lieu. Call-outs were always minimal, and there were never any issues with me taking the time here and there to make up for it. Any calls in the middle of the night were quickly resolved, and I had no problem getting back to sleep. Appointments in the middle of the day were fine because of the additional hours from whenever. This worked well for almost my entire time there. I also always started early, depending on when I left the house, got into the office, and got my coffee. Could have been anywhere between 5 and 30 minutes because I would leave the house earlier so as to not wake the family if the school was off that day. I didn't care at that point. It never bothered me. They got free time for me. But again, I did not care because, honestly, what else did I have to do? It was a great job until it wasn't. One weekend, I was working on some hardware maintenance, cleaning up wiring, Ethernet plugs, installing a new UPS that took me the better part of Sunday to complete, 6 to 8 hours or so. This was understood, approved in advance, and appreciated. The following week, I decided to start burning those extra hours. I still came in early, as I had done for years, but started leaving an hour early from my regular end time every day if nothing was going on. This is important. If something needed to be done, I got it done. I was reachable via email until early evening, and by phone pretty much 24/7. This particular week was slow, so I had nothing going on. I left an hour early for the first 4 days. On Friday, my boss came to me and gently said, "People notice that you've been leaving early this week. I'd like you to make sure you stay in your office until the scheduled end of the day in case someone needs you." I explained to him that I was burning up lieu days, and he just reiterated that it looks bad to others. Seriously? You can't tell the others that I work 40 hours a week, just not at the same time as them? Fine. Cue the MC. I immediately submitted 4 hours of overtime for the hours that I didn't take in lieu. I still showed up at the office at whatever time I got there, but didn't start any work until 8 a.m. If asked, I would say, sure, 8 a.m. start time. If I got called outside of office hours, depending on how long I spent on the issue, I logged it as overtime. The user called me at 7 p.m. to ask a question. I answer him in 30 seconds, 1 hour OT. When my boss started to ask, "How come you're submitting all this overtime?" I responded with a simple, "Some people don't understand or like me taking lieu time, so I need to claim it as overtime since I am at my desk from 8 to 4. Because I wasn't available at his beck and call, it ended up costing them more money. 95% of my job could be done from home because of full remote access, but that stupid old school mentality means that people in the office need to see you at your desk all day long. I left the company very shortly after that for a much better paying job with full work from home. Know your worth. Story 4. Tell me to work when I'm not on the clock and just happen to be in the building? How about instead I organize the staff into a resistance that lasted years after I left? I used to work in a trade shop run by a great boss everyone got along great with, except for one of the department heads. Let's call them B. For reasons unrelated to this story, the boss decided to sell the shop to B, and in the wake, the majority of the staff quit within months, leaving us understaffed. I naively decided to stick it out and assumed that B would hire people to fill the empty positions. They don't. We went from a 15-person trade shop down to a 5-person within a year, and that includes the 6 people who turned over. One of the many issues that developed, and there were many, was B's inability to schedule, think through actions to the end, or plan ahead. When I worked there, the 2 years with Boss, I often came in 10 to 15 minutes early due to the nature of my commute. I'd come in, unload my stuff, make some coffee, talk with my coworkers, and shoot with my boss. But we never really started work until everyone's scheduled start time. When B took over, the moment you stepped into the shop, B immediately started to bark orders at you, regardless if you were in the building 15 to 20 minutes early. Mostly it's because B was in a rush to get something done they just remembered. When I, the now most senior person left at the shop from the old regime, would point out we technically weren't on the clock yet for another 15 to 20 minutes, and I wanted to make coffee, B would just snap at you, telling me to do it now because so-and-so is coming right at opening. So I started to wait in my car, bring in my coffee from home, and would only walk in the door as the last minute was changing. I was technically never late to work and was ready to work the moment I stepped through the door. I don't know if B caught on, but the rest of my staff did and followed suit, since I told them to. For the remaining months I lasted there, all my coworkers would still often show up early to work, but all wait in the vehicles. At some point, one of them had a minivan, and we all partied in there and go in as a group. Anytime a new person joined because someone walked off, we would also warn them of what would happen. It's been several years since I worked there, and I do not know any of the current staff besides B. I happened to be doing an on-site install nearby at the time that the shop would open and looked over into the parking lot in the front of the shop. Like clockwork, a minute before the shop was scheduled to open, about 6 people got out of their vehicles and headed in. I may not work there, but it's nice to see my resistance still exists. For those asking why I just didn't clock in early and get overtime, it's simply because I didn't want to. One, I deliberately arrived to work early so that I can get into the correct headspace to deal with B, and I want to hang out with the staff for a few minutes before I have to deal with the daily shit show. 2, at that point, I had just put to end the 10 to 11-hour workdays I was putting in to deal with cleaning up B's mess. I was willing to help out since I felt bad that half the staff left and they just needed the help. I also like money. But after 6+ months of the same mistakes happening with no effort on B's part to even know there were issues, I burned out. So I informed B that I was only working 8-hour days and that I would not come in early or stay late. I only lasted another few months before I found another shop. 3, I'm a vindictive person, and at this point, I was enjoying watching the world burn around B. Those were the stories for today. Thank you for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe for more engaging Reddit stories.